Have you ever wondered what happens when a weapon uh, decides it just no longer cares what it destroys?
That is a deeply unsettling question to start with.
Right. But seriously, imagine holding a sword that was forged specifically to protect your home. It's, flawlessly balanced.
Razor sharp.
Exactly, razor sharp. An absolute masterpiece of lethal engineering, guaranteed to sever any threat. But there is this fatal design flaw built right into the hilt.
And you don't realize it until it's too late.
Yeah. Every single time you swing this blade to strike an enemy, the pommel shears backward. It slices right into your own flesh, severing your own arteries.
Ouch. Yeah, that is grim.
It eradicates the intruder, absolutely, but it bleeds you dry in the process. So my question for you, the listener, is at what point do you stop viewing that object as a tool of defense?
Right, when does it become the enemy?
Exactly. When do you recognize it as a completely unhinged force of destruction that is actively dismantling the very thing it was built to save?
That is the core of what we are looking at today.
It really is. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a fascinating, incredibly dark, and highly philosophical stack of notes. This is based on a Thor's text called Marine's Malevolent, The Grim Calculus of Victory.
It is quite the read.
Oh, man, it is. And we're going to look at a faction of supposedly loyal servants who have become, honestly, utterly indistinguishable from the cosmic horrors they were engineered to fight. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's dive in, because the premise here requires us to look way beyond the surface-level military debriefings presented in the text.
Which is easy to get lost in, the tactical stuff.
Oh, absolutely. But what we're really examining here is a total collapse of morality under the crushing weight of an existential threat. Our source material focuses on this group, the Marines Malevolent.
Operating in the 41st millennium.
Right, within the totalitarian, brutal regime of the Imperium. But this is not a straightforward tactical history.
No, not at all.
It is a deeply unsettling autopsy of the grim calculus of war. It forces an examination of what happens to a civilization when it decides that raw survival is literally the only metric that matters.
Just completely abandoning every ethical constraint.
Exactly. They abandon all of it in the pursuit of that single goal. We are looking at the absolute corruption of the concept of protection.
And to really grasp how twisted that concept of protection has become for this faction, we kind of have to look at how the source text establishes their baseline identity. Like, before we even touch their history, we need to understand their current operational philosophy.
Which is bleak, to say the least.
So bleak. The text explicitly warns against viewing them as, noble paladins or heroic defenders. Instead, it defines them as the Imperium's most callous and self-serving enforcers.
Callous and self-serving.
Yeah, that pairing of words paints a very specific picture. I mean, they operate on a doctrine that elevates victory above absolutely everything else.
No matter the cost.
Right. And the text doesn't leave that to interpretation either. It explicitly states that they view the lives of Imperial citizens and even their fellow allied Space Marines as acceptable sacrifices.
Acceptable sacrifices. That term is really the cornerstone of their entire psychological framework.
Yeah, it's just so cold.
It is, because think about traditional doctrines of warfare. Civilian lives, and to a large extent the lives of allied forces, well, they are the objective.
Right. They are the things you're supposed to be protecting.
Exactly. They are the fragile things being shielded by the military apparatus. But for the Marines Malevolent, those lives are stripped of their intrinsic value.
They just don't matter.
No, they are transformed into raw variables. They literally become currency to be spent on a tactical ledger.
It makes me think of like a biological system turning on itself.
How do you mean?
Well, imagine a body fighting off a severe infection. A normal immune system attacks the pathogens. Maybe causes a fever, some localized inflammation.
Sure, collateral damage, but controlled.
Exactly. But the Marines Malevolent are like an immune system that decides the most efficient way to eradicate a localized infection in the hand is to just trigger necrosis and rot the entire arm off.
Wow.
I mean, it kills the bacteria, sure, but it cripples the host organism permanently.
Yeah.
And the immune system doesn't care because in its microscopic logic, the infection is gone, threat neutralized.
That is a gruesome comparison, but it fits perfectly.
Right.
The localized objective is achieved, but the broader entity they are theoretically designed to sustain is irrevocably damaged by the cure.
Which brings me to a massive point of friction I have with the source text.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
It repeatedly refers to them as loyal servants of the Imperium, even while detailing this horrific callousness.
Yes, the loyalty question.
Like, how can any entity be considered loyal if it views the very citizens it is sworn to serve, like the actual flesh and blood people who make up the Imperium,
Yeah.
as entirely expendable fuel.
It is a huge paradox.
Right. Loyalty implies a duty of care. It feels like the text is presenting this massive contradiction.
Well, the text wants us to struggle with that contradiction. It hinges on a deliberate perversion of the word loyalty.
Okay, unpack that for me.
To understand the Marines' malevolent, we have to understand the environment that forged them. In the 41st millennium, loyalty is not a democratic ideal.
It's definitely not about the people.
No, it is not owed to the individual taxpayer or the civilian worker or the concept of human rights. Their loyalty is to the overarching abstract monolith of the Imperium itself.
The institution.
Yes. They are loyal to the regime's continued existence as a sovereign power.
So they are loyal to the borders drawn on the map, but they
Uh,
couldn't care less about the people actually living inside those borders.
Exactly. The people are just the soil the empire grows in.
Wow, that is dark.
If a billion citizens have to be incinerated to ensure the regime's bureaucratic engine continues to turn, well, the Marines' malevolent do not see a tragedy.
You just see a job well done.
They see a successful execution of their duty. And this brings us back to that phrase from the title of our source, the grim calculus.
Right. The math of it all.
War is often historicized through an emotional or heroic lens. Tales of courage, tragic last stands, martial honor.
Yeah, movies, books, all of that.
But calculus implies a chilling departure from emotion. Calculus is the mathematics of change. It is cold, unfeeling, and absolute.
It just strips away the poetry and leaves the raw data.
Precisely. When you apply calculus to a battlefield, you are merely balancing an equation. You have variables: enemy combatants, allied forces, civilian populations, infrastructure, topography.
Just numbers on a screen to them.
If the only acceptable output on the other side of the equal sign is zero enemy presence, then morality is fundamentally erased from the process.
The math doesn't have a conscience.
The equation does not recognize the difference between subtracting an enemy warlord or subtracting an allied refugee column, as long as the sum total results in victory. The math only cares that the ledger balances.
So, listener, imagine looking up into the atmosphere of your home world, knowing an invasion fleet is bearing down on you.
Pure terror.
You see the drop pods of your supposed saviors streaking through the clouds, and instead of relief, you feel absolute dread.
Because you know what comes next.
Because you know that to the super soldiers descending from the sky, you are mathematically indistinguishable from the alien invaders trying to kill you.
You are just a variable.
You are just a localized obstacle occupying space in a combat zone. The text paints a picture of a universe where the supposed good guys operate with this terrifying sociopathic pragmatism.
The horror of that scenario is profound. It shifts the source of terror entirely.
You're not just scared of the aliens anymore.
Exactly. You are no longer just afraid of the monster trying to break down your door. You are equally terrified of the entity sent to kill the monster.
Because they'll just blow up the door, the house, and you.
Because that entity will casually detonate your entire neighborhood if it calculates a fractional tactical advantage in doing so.
And we really have to ask how any group arrives at such a terminal lack of empathy.
It doesn't happen overnight.
Right. They couldn't have been founded on the principle of hating the people they protect. To understand their current state, this grim calculus, the text points us toward their origins.
Which is a fascinating pivot in the text.
It is an incredible juxtaposition. The source material notes they were created during a relatively unremarkable founding back in the 32nd millennium.
Right.
But their original designation was wildly different. They were originally called the Golden Choir.
The Golden Choir. The linguistic dissonance between those two names is just staggering.
Here's where it gets really interesting, honestly. Think about the thematic weight of the Golden Choir.
It sounds beautiful.
It does. When you hear a phrase like that, it evokes imagery of harmony, of celestial unity, of voices raised together in a celebrated, perhaps even divine purpose.
It implies a deep sense of nobility and purity.
And then we look at the reality of what they are today. The Marines, malevolent.
Malevolence is an incredibly active word.
It really is.
It is not passive apathy. It is not simple pragmatism or a tragic detachment from humanity.
It's aggressive.
Malevolence is the conscious desire to inflict harm or suffering on others. It implies malice, spite, and a fundamental cruelty.
So how does an organization devolve from a golden harmony into an actively spiteful instrument of cruelty?
Well, the text uses this drastic name shift to map a massive trajectory of decay. We aren't actually given a granular battle-by-battle history of those intervening millennia.
No, the records are pretty vague.
Right. Instead, the name change serves as an environmental storytelling device. It implies that whatever noble ideals they were founded upon, that pure golden choir philosophy, well, it was methodically ground to dust
By the universe they live in.
by the sheer unyielding horror of the galaxy they inhabit. It suggests an institution that didn't just lose its way, but had its empathy violently beaten out of it over centuries of grinding warfare.
Replacing that harmony with just this bitter, cynical drive to survive.
Exactly. The universe essentially forced a choir to become an executioner's block.
And the text deepens this mystery by touching on their genetic lineage, or rather, the lack thereof.
The missing gene seed records.
Yeah. In this setting, a Space Marine chapter's genetic heritage, like knowing which legendary demigod they descend from, is usually the absolute bedrock of their culture.
It dictates everything.
Right. It dictates their tactics, their traditions, their entire identity. But for the Marines Malevolent, their lineage is officially unknown. It is a complete blank spot.
Which is very rare.
Super rare. However, nature abhors a vacuum, and so people speculate. The text points out that observers strongly suspect they are the successors of three highly specific lineages.
The Iron Hands, the World Eaters, or the Night Lords.
Yeah, and the text is careful to note that this speculation isn't based on access to classified biological records.
No, it's not a lab test.
It is based entirely on the Marines' Malevolent's brutal methodology and their profound disdain for weakness.
That detail is incredibly revealing, actually.
Oh, totally. Even if you, the listener, only have a passing familiarity with this lore, those three names carry massive thematic baggage.
They are the worst of the worst in terms of brutality.
Observers watch the Marines' Malevolent wage war, they watch them casually sacrifice allies, and the only logical conclusion they can draw is that these warriors must be the direct biological descendants of the most terrifying, broken, and violently unstable factions in galactic history.
The speculation itself serves as an indictment of their character. Let's really examine why those specific three are the primary suspects.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Take the Iron Hands. They are defined by a pathological hatred of the frailty of flesh. They are driven by cold mechanical logic to the point of literal self-mutilation.
Replacing limbs with cybernetics just to feel less?
Yes. They seek to replace humanity with unfeeling metal. Then you have the World Eaters. Before their fall, they were infamous for relying on psychosurgical implants that robbed them of all emotion except blinding berserker rage.
Turning them into uncontrollable butchers?
Exactly. And finally, the Night Lords. They utilize psychological warfare so extreme, relying on torture and terror tactics, that they sought to win wars by broadcasting the flaying of civilian populations just to force a surrender.
Man. So, you have a faction defined by cold, mechanical ruthlessness, a faction defined by uncontrollable butchery, and a faction defined by the weaponization of pure terror.
A terrible trio.
And the wider Imperium looks at the Marines Malevolent and says, yeah, they must be related to those guys.
Which is why whether there is any biological truth to the rumors is almost irrelevant.
The perception is the reality.
The cultural DNA is undeniable. The fact that their actions on the battlefield evoke the memory of those notorious legions tells us everything about their operational footprint.
It's how they are seen by everyone.
It suggests that their cruelty might not just be a choice, but a deeply ingrained compulsion. Whether that is born of defective gene seed or millennia of cultural trauma, we don't know. But they are defined entirely by the horror they inflict.
And that cultural DNA bleeds directly into how they function day to day. The text outlines their culture as resting on two massive, unshakable pillars.
Contempt and victory.
Exactly. A profound contempt for weakness and an absolute dedication to victory no matter the cost.
The dangerous combination.
And the natural result of behaving this way for thousands of years is that they have been pushed to the absolute fringes of imperial society. Like, no one wants them around.
They are pariahs.
Yet, despite being outcasts, the text emphasizes they possess a massive superiority complex.
They really do. They view their isolation not as a punishment, but as proof of their elevated status.
It's fascinating because it forces us to look at the logistics of that isolation. A Space Marine chapter requires immense logistical support.
Massive amounts of resources.
They need armor, weapons, gene seed cultivation, massive void ships. Usually they get this by maintaining strong political and material ties with the wider Imperium, particularly the Adeptus Mechanicus who supply their war gear.
Right, it's a symbiotic relationship.
But if the Marines Malevolent have alienated everyone with their contempt, how do they even function? They must be forced to scavenge, to rely on battlefield salvage,
Picking over the dead.
maybe even extorting planetary governors, or stripping the armor off allied dead just to keep their own war machine running.
Which would only further cement their reputation as vultures and pariahs.
Wait, I mean, that perfectly illustrates the problem. If they're pushed to the fringes,
Yeah.
reduced to scavenging because they are universally despised by the society they're fighting for, doesn't their superiority complex become a massive, dangerous delusion?
That is the big question.
Who are they even protecting at that point? If you hate the citizenry for being weak and the citizenry hates you for being monsters, you aren't a defense force anymore.
No, you're something else entirely.
You're just an autonomous pocket of violence perpetuating your own existence.
What is fascinating here is how the text frames that alienation. It isn't a tragic misunderstanding. It is the unavoidable mathematical output of their ideology.
They brought it on themselves.
You ask who they are fighting for. The text implies they are fighting purely for the concept of victory itself.
Victory for victory's sake.
Exactly. The objective has completely replaced the reason for the objective. They are fighting to win simply because losing is weakness.
It's victory completely divorced from consequence or meaning.
Let's dissect that profound contempt for weakness. Contempt, in a psychological context, often functions as a robust defense mechanism.
Okay, like a coping strategy.
Consider the reality of a space marine. They are functionally immortal, engineered for perpetual warfare in a galaxy filled with endless horrors.
The things they see on a daily basis are unimaginable.
If they retained human empathy, if they actually felt the weight of every civilian casualty, if they mourned every Imperial guardsman who died holding a line, their minds would shatter.
He would just break down.
The psychological toll of caring would be fatal.
So the contempt is a shield.
It is absolute psychological armor. By categorizing everyone else in the galaxy as fundamentally weak, the Marines' Malevolent insulate themselves from guilt.
That makes a twisted sort of sense.
If an Allied regiment is wiped out because the Malevolent refused to reinforce them, it isn't a failure of duty, it is simply the weak being purged from the equation.
Oh, wow.
If civilians are crushed under the treads of their tanks, it is because those civilians were too weak to survive a war zone. Contempt allows them to externalize the blame for the atrocities they commit.
So nothing is ever their fault.
Never. They never fail. Others simply fail to meet their impossible standard of strength.
That is a terrifying rationalization. If I define you as inherently inferior, I don't have to lose any sleep when I use you as bait to draw out an enemy sniper.
Precisely.
I can just tell myself your death was an inevitable symptom of your own frailty.
And this rationalization creates an inescapable feedback loop. Their callous methods alienate them from Imperial commanders. No one will fight alongside them unless absolutely desperate.
Because they know they might get shot in the back by them.
Right. This forces them into logistical poverty, making them even more desperate and ruthless on the battlefield to secure supplies.
Which just makes people hate them more.
When they look around and see they are despised and alone, they don't engage in self-reflection. They interpret that isolation as validation.
They think it means they are right.
They tell themselves, we are alone because we are the only ones strong enough to do the brutal math required to survive. The rest of the Imperium is simply too weak to stomach the reality of our existence.
Wow.
The isolation breeds further contempt, and the contempt justifies further brutality.
They trap themselves in an echo chamber of their own malice. But all of this philosophical framework, the psychology and the logistics of their contempt, is put to a very literal test in the source text.
We finally get to see it in action.
Yeah, we aren't just left with theory. The text provides a massive, infamous case study where this grim calculus was deployed on an active battlefield.
The theory materializes into devastating practice.
So the deep dive shifts focus to a specific, monumental conflict, the Third War for Armageddon.
A legendary campaign in this lore.
Right. For context for you listening, Armageddon is one of the most densely populated, heavily industrialized hive worlds in the Imperium. And the Third War was a planetary siege of unimaginable scale against a massive orc invasion.
Billions of people caught in the crossfire.
Billions. The text states that the actions of the Marines, Malevolent, during this specific war cemented their reputation for callous brutality.
It's the defining moment for them.
It details that they deployed 2 full companies, which is a massive commitment of force, and it includes a very specific, deliberate detail. This deployment featured a detachment of whirlwind artillery.
The whirlwind.
Yeah, the text concludes this section by stating their combat doctrine is a terrifyingly simple application. They're willing to do absolutely anything to win.
That phrase, anything to win, takes on a whole new dimension when paired with the tactical realities of Armageddon.
I really want to dig into the text's specific choice to highlight whirlwind artillery here.
It's very intentional.
In a universe filled with chainswords, plasma incinerators, and orbital lasers, the text points out artillery to prove their callous brutality. We have to look at the mechanism of a whirlwind.
It is not a precision weapon.
Not at all. It is a mobile missile launcher designed to blanket a grid square in high explosive or incendiary suppression fire. It doesn't pick out enemy combatants. It races coordinates.
It is the delivery of blunt force trauma on a massive, indiscriminate scale.
Right. And Armageddon is a hive world. We are talking about megacities where billions of civilians and millions of Imperial Guard soldiers are fighting house to house, corridor to corridor against the orcs.
It's urban warfare at its absolute worst.
The front lines aren't clear fields. They are hopelessly tangled urban meat grinders. If the text uses the deployment of area of effect artillery to highlight their infamy, it implies something horrific.
That they didn't care who was in the way.
You don't get labeled as uniquely callous just by bombing the enemy. You get that label by calling down a continuous artillery barrage on a contested sector, fully aware that your own allied regiments and thousands of trapped civilians are in the blast radius.
And firing anyway.
And firing anyway, just because the enemy is also in that radius.
The tactical application perfectly aligns with their psychological profile. The use of 2 full companies shows they had the infantry to engage in precision strikes to clear sectors block by block.
They could have gone in on foot.
They absolutely could have. But the text deliberately draws our attention to the artillery. It serves as the ultimate proof of the grim calculus in motion.
Talk to us about the sheer mechanical detachment of that choice. Like, why is an artillery barrage the perfect manifestation of their philosophy?
Because of the distance it creates, both physical and moral, artillery is the literal mathematical elimination of a target.
It's all just numbers.
A firing solution requires distance, wind resistance, explosive yield, and trajectory. You are feeding numbers into a targeting cogitator. When a commander looks at a hololithic map of a hive city sector, they see icons representing orc hordes, icons representing Imperial Guard defenders, and heat signatures representing civilian populations.
A chaotic mix of friend and foe.
For any standard military force, the intermingling of those icons dictates a change in tactics. You send in infantry, you attempt to extract the assets.
You try to save your people.
But the Marines' Malevolent look at that same map and see something entirely different.
What do they see?
They see an equation waiting to be balanced. The calculus dictates that the orc presence must be reduced to 0.
No matter what.
If the most mathematically efficient way to achieve that involves saturating the entire grid with incendiary missiles, well, the presence of allied icons on the map is merely a tertiary variable.
It doesn't matter enough to stop them.
It doesn't alter the core equation. The allied troops and civilians become the acceptable sacrifices we discussed earlier. The commander gives the order to fire without a moment of hesitation.
The visceral reality of that is just staggering. Put yourself in the boots of an Imperial Guardsman on Armageddon for a second.
It's a nightmare scenario.
You've been holding a barricade for days against an endless tide of orcs. Your ammunition is spent, your squad is decimated. You look up and see the gunships of the Adeptus Astartes breaking through the smog.
The angels of death have arrived.
Right. You think your prayers have been answered. You are saved. And then you hear the screaming descent of whirlwind missiles raining down directly onto your position.
Because the Space Marines decided your life was a mathematically acceptable price to pay to clear the barricade.
The betrayal in that moment transforms the Marines' Malevolent from saviors into a localized apocalyptic event. They're just a natural disaster wearing power armor.
That betrayal forces a massive shift in perspective, which leads us into the final and most profound assertion made by the source text.
We have to zoom out here.
We have to pan the camera back from the horrors of Armageddon and look at the systemic structure of the Imperium itself. Why does an interstellar empire tolerate an armed force that routinely massacres its own citizenry to achieve tactical goals?
Right. Why haven't they been stopped?
Because, as the final section of our text points out, they don't treat the Marines' Malevolent as a rogue error in the system.
It frames them as the purest embodiment of the Imperium's self-destructive, cynical soul.
Exactly.
The text argues that they have simply taken the Imperium's underlying logic and followed it to its absolute, inevitable conclusion.
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is. It makes this staggering thematic statement. The Imperium's greatest enemies are not the external threats. like the alien Xenos or the demonic heretics.
It's the monsters within.
The monsters within, forged by the Imperium's own cruel, uncaring bureaucracy. The line separating a loyal servant from a monster in the 41st millennium isn't just thin, it's practically non-existent.
If we connect this to the broader themes of the lore, it serves as a masterful dissection of authoritarian systems.
How so?
The text sets up the traditional villains, the monsters clawing at the gates from the outside. But it argues the true existential threat is the rot institutionalized within the walls.
So, what does this all mean? The realization I had while reading this is that the Marines' Malevolent aren't malfunctioning.
No, not at all.
They aren't a bug in the Imperial operating system. They are a feature operating at maximum efficiency.
They're doing exactly what they were designed to do.
If you engineer a galactic society where human life is treated as the cheapest, most abundant resource available, and where survival of the regime is elevated above all moral considerations, you cannot act shocked when your elite soldiers start doing the math.
They simply realized that the fastest way to win is to stop caring about collateral damage.
They took the unspoken subtext of the Imperium's brutal regime and made it their explicit operational text.
Yes. The Imperium preaches that sacrifice is necessary for survival. The Adeptus Ministorum demands martyrs. The Inquisition demands purges.
It's built into every level of their society.
The Marines' Malevolent simply took out a slate, crunched the numbers, and calculated exactly how much friendly flesh they could sacrifice, while technically still maintaining a defensive posture.
The citizens are never viewed as a sacred trust to be protected.
They are raw material to be burned in the engine of war. The Marines' Malevolent are merely the most ruthless stokers of that engine.
This forces us to ask the ultimate question regarding this faction. Are they actually broken?
That is the crux of the text.
Are they a defective weapon that needs to be discarded? Or are they functioning flawlessly, providing exactly what the grim, utilitarian reality of the 41st millennium demands?
This raises an important question about the nature of complicity. I would argue they are not an aberration. They are a mirror.
A mirror.
They reflect the calcified, corrupt, and utterly exhausted soul of the Imperium back at its rulers. When other Imperial factions express disgust at the Marines' Malevolent, it isn't necessarily a moral objection to the death toll.
Oh, interesting. What is it then?
It is a reaction to the lack of hypocrisy.
Oh, that is a brilliant point.
Yeah.
The rest of the Imperium wraps its atrocities in religious dogma and noble rhetoric.
The Imperium needs the veneer of nobility to function. It needs to tell its citizens that their sacrifices are glorious.
That they're dying for a holy cause.
Exactly. But the Marines' Malevolent strip away that propaganda. They refuse to pretend they are the Golden Choir.
They own the malevolence.
They embrace the malevolence because they recognize that malevolence is the foundational requirement for the system's survival. They are hated not because they break the rules, but because they expose the brutal reality of the rules to everyone else.
They are the grim calculus personified, without the comforting lies.
Precisely.
Wow. This has been a relentless, heavy, but incredibly illuminating journey through the darkest corners of this lore.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. Let's synthesize the massive amount of ground we've covered today. We started with the tragic irony of their origins, a faction once known as the Golden Choir.
A name evoking unity and divine purpose.
Slowly corroding over millennia of endless war, until nothing remained but the spiteful, actively malicious entity known as the Marines' Malevolent.
We explored the genetic speculation, too.
Right, tying them to the most brutal lineages, the mechanical coldness of the Iron Hands, the blind butchery of the World Eaters, the terror tactics of the Night Lords, proving that their reputation for cruelty is their defining characteristic.
We also examined the psychological mechanics of their extreme isolation.
Yes, how their profound contempt for weakness isn't just a bad attitude.
It's a necessary psychological armor, allowing them to process their own horrific actions without succumbing to guilt. Yet, that very armor traps them in a feedback loop,
Alienating them from allies, forcing them into scavenging and desperation.
which only validates their belief that they are the only ones strong enough to do the brutal math of survival.
And then we watched that math put into devastating practice during the Third War for Armageddon. We analyzed how the deliberate use of indiscriminate whirlwind artillery in a crowded hive city perfectly encapsulates their view of civilians and allies as acceptable variables to be wiped from the equation.
And finally, we confronted the chilling reality that these warriors are not a glitch in the Imperium's design.
No, they are a dark, unblinking reflection of a society that has decided survival justifies any atrocity. stripping away the hypocrisy of noble intentions to reveal the raw, monstrous machinery underneath.
The value in dissecting this text is gaining a profound understanding of how extreme utilitarian ideology functions when divorced from empathy.
It serves as a stark warning about the mechanics of endless conflict.
It demonstrates how a mandate for absolute victory, when prioritized over the ethics of how that victory is achieved, will inevitably erase the distinction between the protector and the predator.
Which leaves us with a heavy, lingering thought for you to explore long after this deep dive ends.
A question of survival.
Exactly. If a civilization is so fundamentally broken, so intrinsically cruel and uncaring that it inevitably organically forges its most loyal defenders into sociopathic monsters, at what point is the survival they are so desperately calculating no longer worth the cost?
If you have to sacrifice every shred of humanity, every ounce of morality, and every last vestige of the soul just to ensure the regime sees another dawn, what exactly is left that is actually worth saving?
Keep asking those tough questions. Keep examining the systems and structures around you, and always push to see the complex machinery beneath the surface of the text. And remember, the next time someone offers you a flawless weapon to defend your home, you better make absolutely certain you know what it's willing to destroy. Until next time.